The gunshot was the crack of a bone, sharp and final. It split the midday stupor of redemption, a town that existed in a perpetual haze of ochre dust and simmering despair. Inside the First Territorial Bank, the air thick with the scent of old paper and fear went still. Violet Palmer, standing frozen on the boardwalk across the street, watched the world shatter. Augustus Gus Palmer, her husband, stood just inside the bank's doorway, a smoking Colt in his hand, and a look of wild, stupid panic on his face. He was part of them, the gang of hard-faced men led by a figure of chilling stillness, a man named Jeremiah Cask. They had descended on the town like a plague of locusts, all dust-caked leather and cold eyes. Idiot Cask's voice was not a shout, but a low hiss that cut through the ensuing silence more effectively than any scream. That wasn't the plan. Gus's stray bullet had found the kindest man in redemption. Dr. Alistair Finch, his spectacles askew, was slumping against the teller's cage, a dark bloom spreading across his starched white shirt. His hand clutching a small leather bag went limp. He had been on his way to see the Miller boy down with a fever. He was always on his way to help someone. He had been the closest thing to a father Violet had ever known. A scream built in Violet's throat, a raw, ragged thing, but it died before it could find voice. The world dissolved into a maelstrom of shouting men and screaming horses. The robbers burst from the bank. Cask in the lead, a heavy satchel slung over his shoulder. He moved with the fluid economy of a wolf, his eyes sweeping the street, calculating cold. Gus saw her then. His gaze, full of a coward's fury, locked onto hers. While the other men were mounting their horses, he lunged across the boardwalk, his hand clamping around her arm like a manacle. No witnesses, he snarled, his breath a foul mix of whiskey and terror. He dragged her toward his horse, her feet stumbling in the thick dust. "Let go of me." The words were a choked whisper. She fought him, a frantic, useless struggle against his brute strength. Her mind was a white-hot blank, consumed by the image of Dr. Finch, falling, the gentle light in his eyes extinguished forever. As Gus hauled her toward his saddle, the fine silver chain around her neck snapped. A small, heart-shaped locket, Dr. Finch's last birthday gift to her, fell to the dirt. Inside were two tiny, faded portraits, her mother and father taken years before they were lost to cholera. It was the only piece of them she had left. "My locket," she cried, reaching for it, but it was too late. Gus shoved her onto the horse, his body slamming against hers as he swung up behind her. He paid her no mind, his attention fixed on Cask, who was already thundering down the main street. With a vicious kick, Gus spurred his mount, and the horse's heavy hoof came down directly on the small silver heart, grinding it into the unforgiving earth, a final casual act of destruction. The world blurred into a chaos of thundering hooves, choking dust and the howling wind of their escape. Trapped in Gus's grip, Violet looked back just once. She saw the people of redemption pouring into the street, their forms warped by the rising heat and her own blurring tears. They were gathering around the fallen doctor, their grief a silent, terrible tableau. The trampled locket was a crushed silver wound in the dust. A part of her had been crushed with it. She was no longer just a neglected wife. She was a captive torn from the wreckage of a life Gus had just helped to burn to the ground. The Wyoming plains stretched before them, a vast and indifferent canvas under a sun that hammered the land into a blinding mirror. The heat rising from the parched earth warped the horizon into a trembling mirage, offering no hope, no sanctuary. Only an endless expanse of ochre and pale, sun-bleached sky. For 2 days they rode into that emptiness. Gus spoke little, his silence a brooding, violent thing. He was a man running not just from the law, but from the magnitude of his own failure. He had botched the robbery, killed an innocent man, and drawn the attention of the gang's formidable leader. His fear curdled into a rage that he directed at the only person he could safely dominate, her. Their destination was a miserable homestead squatting in the shadow of a bleak, wind-scoured butte. a testament to 5 years of failed crops and broken dreams. The cabin was little more than a pile of rotting logs chinked with dried mud. A single skeletal cottonwood stood sentinel over the property, its bare branches clawing at the sky. "Get inside." Gus grunted, shoving her from the horse. She landed hard, the impact jarring her bones. The cabin's interior was a cage of shadows and despair. A cold hearth, a rickety table, and 2 chairs were the only furniture. The air hung thick with the smell of stale whiskey and defeat. This was where her life had withered over the past 5 years, a slow, agonizing decay of hope. But now it was a prison. That night, Jeremiah Kask and 2 other gang members arrived. They appeared out of the twilight like specters, their horses moving with an unnerving silence. Kask dismounted and entered the cabin, without knocking, his presence immediately shrinking the small space. He was a man of medium height, but he carried himself with an authority that made him seem immense. His face was a mask of intelligent angles and sharp planes, his eyes a pale, chilling blue. He did not look like a common outlaw. He looked like a fallen general. "Your husband is a liability, Mrs. Palmer Kask," said his voice calm and precise. He ignored Gus completely, his gaze fixed on Violet. It was a disconcerting, analytical stare, as if he were cataloging her weaknesses. "He panics. He makes mistakes. He shot a civilian, which brings a different kind of heat than robbing a bank." Gus, who had been nursing a bottle at the table, bristled. "It was an accident. The old fool got in the way." Kask's head turned slowly, a predator's deliberate movement. "An accident, Augustus, that has put my entire operation at risk. The documents in that satchel are worth 1,000 times more than the cash we left behind. They are the key to my future, a future you have jeopardized." He walked over to the table and picked up the satchel he had carried from the bank. He opened it, revealing not stacks of currency, but a collection of rolled parchments, leather-bound ledgers, and sealed documents. He unrolled one, an old, hand-drawn map. His focus on it was absolute, his fingers tracing lines that were invisible to Violet from across the room. "My plan requires precision." Kask continued, his voice a low murmur. "It requires leverage. That is where you come in, Mrs. Palmer." A cold dread coiled in Violet's stomach. The rhythmic creak of the floorboards under Kask's boots seemed to count down the seconds to her doom. "I don't know anything," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Oh, I think you do," Kask replied, a thin, mirthless smile touching his lips. "Dr. Finch spoke of you often. His little protégé. The girl with a gentle hand and a love for the territory's history. He told everyone about the summers you spent helping him archive old territorial records. Records of land grants, surveys, treaties. He let the words hang in the air. He also spoke of his friendship with the Lakota, particularly a certain horse lord who controls the lands to the north. A man who trusts very few white people." The pieces began to click into place, forming a picture of terrifying clarity. The robbery wasn't about money. It was about the documents. And Gus. Gus was not just her abuser. He was her keeper, a tool used by this cold, calculating man to get to her. "I need to find their sacred valley." Mrs. Palmer Kask said, his polite tone making the words infinitely more menacing. The doctor knew its location. "I believe he may have shared that knowledge with you." "He never did." Violet said, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. Dr. Finch had spoken of the valley, but only in hushed, reverent tones, describing a place of impossible beauty and spiritual power. A sanctuary whose location was a secret protected for generations. He would never have betrayed that trust. Kask sighed, a sound of theatrical disappointment. "A pity. We will have to find another way to persuade our Lakota friends to cooperate." He turned to Gus. "Your usefulness has not entirely expired, Augustus. You will take your wife to Whitmore's trading post. You will make a scene. Offer to trade her. The horse lord Hakan Wakanen is known to trade there. He has a particular sense of honor. He will not abide a woman being treated like chattel. When he intervenes, you will have your leverage. Gus stared at him, his liquor-soaked mind struggling to grasp the serpentine logic of the plan. Leverage for what? For a guide, Cask said patiently. Or a hostage. Either will suffice. Get me through his territory and I will be generous. Fail me again and I will leave you for the wolves. He looked back at Violet, his pale eyes devoid of any human warmth. Your husband blames you for his failures, Mrs. Palmer. His barren fields, his empty pockets. But you see, you are in fact his most valuable asset. Isn't that a tragic irony? With that, Cask and his men melted back into the night, leaving Violet alone with Gus and the suffocating weight of the truth. She was a pawn in a game she didn't understand, her life a bargaining chip for a man whose cruelty was as vast and empty as the plains outside. Gus, fueled by Cask's threats and his own bottomless well of resentment, spent the next day drinking himself into a state of belligerent fury. He was a cornered animal, and she was the only thing he could safely attack. Meanwhile, in redemption, Deputy Sheriff Clay Morrow stood over the spot where the silver locket had been crushed. He nudged the mangled piece of metal with the toe of his boot. He'd known Violet Palmer since she was a girl, had watched Dr. Finch raise her after her parents died. He'd also watched Gus Palmer slowly extinguish the light in her eyes over 5 years of miserable marriage. He took her, Clay, the sheriff said, his face grim. Gus Palmer was one of them. Took his own wife after shooting the best man in this county. It doesn't make sense. Sheriff Clay set his cynical mind, picking at the loose threads of the crime. He knelt, picking up the ruined locket. This robbery? They ignored a drawer full of cash. The bank manager said they went straight for the safe deposit box containing the old territorial deeds. They took paper and left gold. That's not a robbery. That's a military operation. His gaze drifted north toward the endless plains. And I don't think Gus Palmer is smart enough to plan one. The journey to Whitmore's trading post was a descent into a waking nightmare. Gus, driven by Casca's orders and his own festering humiliation, was a monster of simmering violence. He tied Violet's hands and forced her to walk behind their broken-down wagon, the rough rope chafing her wrists raw. The 2 lame horses pulling the wagon moved with a pained, shuffling gait that mirrored her own. The sun was a merciless hammer, and the dust kicked up by the wagon wheels coated her throat, making each breath an act of will. Whitmore's trading post sat like a weathered bone against the horizon, a lonely outpost of civilization in a land that actively resisted it. Inside, the air was a thick cocktail of cured hides, tobacco smoke, and the sour sweat of desperate men. Samuel Whitmore, the post's owner, was a pragmatic man whose face was a roadmap of hard years. He watched with weary eyes as Gus Palmer stormed in, dragging Violet behind him. The negotiation, if it could be called that, took place at a rough wooden table near the back. Across from Gus sat the man Casca had predicted would be there, Hakan Wakanen, chief of the Lakota. He was a figure of quiet, powerful dignity. His long black hair was adorned with a single eagle feather, and his dark eyes held a stillness that seemed to absorb the chaos around him without being disturbed by it. He sat with the patience of a man who had learned to read the hearts of both horses and men. 5 years, Gus's voice, slurred with whiskey, boomed across the store, loud enough for the other patrons, 2 cowboys, a traveling preacher, and a buffalo hunter, whose clothes stank of death to hear every bitter word. 5 goddamn years of marriage, and she ain't given me so much as a single child. Not one useless as a broken plow and twice as expensive to keep. Violet stood near the front of the store, her head bowed, feigning work by arranging sacks of flour with her trembling, bound hands. Every word was a lash, stripping away the last remnants of her dignity in front of strangers. "I'll trade her," Gus declared, gesturing vaguely in her direction. "She's young enough, knows how to cook and clean, got all her teeth." He turned his attention fully to the Lakota leader. "I need passage through your lands. Safe passage for me and a business partner. For the root. A fair trade." Hakan Wakanen's gaze shifted from Gus's bloated, flushed face to Violet. He had been watching her since she entered, noting the raw chafing on her wrists, the fear in her eyes, and the defiant set of her jaw. In Lakota culture, women were honored as the givers of life, the sacred vessels of the future. What he was witnessing was an abomination. "Your woman Hakan Wakanen," said his English careful and clear. "She chooses this trade." Gus let out a harsh, barking laugh. "She chooses what I tell her to choose. That's how marriage works, Chief. Man makes the decisions. Woman follows orders." Hakan Wakanen rose from the table with a fluid grace that was mesmerizing. He walked slowly to the front of the store, his moccasined feet silent on the rough wooden planks. He stopped beside Violet, his presence a shield against the scornful eyes of the other men. "White woman," he said softly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "You hear this talk? Your heart, what does it say?" For 5 years, no one had asked what her heart said. Gus made decisions. She endured them. But something in the Lakota chief's patient expression, something in the simple, profound respect of his question, broke through the fear that had paralyzed her. She thought of Dr. Finch's kindness, of the trampled locket, of the cold, dead purpose in Jeremiah Casca's eyes. This was not just about escaping Gus anymore. This was about survival. She lifted her chin, meeting the chief's gaze. "My heart," she said, her voice a reedy whisper that nonetheless carried across the suddenly silent store, "says, I do not want to be traded like a horse." Hakan Wakanen nodded slowly, as if she had confirmed something he already knew. He turned back to Gus. "The woman does not choose this trade," he said simply. "In my people's way, the woman's voice matters. She says no." Gus's face flushed with rage. "She doesn't get a say. She's my wife, my property." He struggled to his feet, swaying. "Now, are you going to give me what I want or not?" The buffalo hunter, a scarred man named Black Pete, grinned, revealing a row of missing teeth. "If the chief ain't interested, I might be. Could use a cook for my winter camp." Violet's blood ran cold. Black Pete's reputation was a thing of grim legend. But before he could say more, Hakan Wakanen stepped between them. His movement was so smooth and decisive, it was like watching a river change course. "The woman chooses," he repeated. Then, looking directly at Violet, his dark eyes held a startling offer. "You come with me if you wish. My people have a place for a woman of courage. No trade, no price, a free choice." The offer hung in the air, a thing of impossible revolutionary grace. In a world where women were property, it was a lightning strike. "Like hell she is," Gus roared, stumbling forward. "You can't just steal another man's property." "Cannot steal what chooses to leave," Hakan Wakanen replied calmly. He looked from Gus to Violet, his expression asking a silent, final question. Here it was. The precipice. Behind her lay the certainty of Gus's cruelty and Cask's cold, deadly plans. Before her lay the terrifying unknown, a stranger's world, a foreign culture. But it was an unknown that began with a choice, something she had not been granted in years. She straightened her shoulders, untied her own bonds with a defiant tug, and for the first time in 5 years, looked her husband directly in the eye. "I choose to go," she said, her voice clear and steady. The raw pain of years found its way into her words. "You've given me bruises and shame and hunger. And you've shown me I'm worth less to you than a safe path through the mountains. I choose freedom." The silence that followed was absolute. Gus, his face a mask of disbelief and fury, took a step toward her. "You ungrateful." Before he could finish, Hakan Wakanen moved. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't need to. He simply placed himself in Gus's path, a silent, immovable mountain. "You threaten a woman under my protection," said, his voice as soft and cold as falling snow. "In my people's way, that makes you my enemy." "Do you want to be my enemy, white man?" Even Gus, in his drunken haze, understood the weight of that question. Making an enemy of the horse lord was a death sentence. The standoff was broken by the sound of approaching riders. Sheriff Morrison and Deputy Clay Morrow appeared in the doorway, their hands resting on their Colts. "We heard there was a disturbance." Clay said, his eyes taking in the scene, Gus red-faced and furious, Hakan Wakanen calm and dangerous, and Violet standing between them, her wrists raw, but her expression defiant. Gus saw his chance. "Deputy, this savage is trying to kidnap my wife." But Clay's gaze was fixed on Violet. "Ma'am," he said, his voice gentle, "are you here of your own free will?" Violet looked at the deputy, a man who had known her since childhood. She thought of the body lying in the street back in Redemption, of the crushed locket. "My husband tried to trade me, deputy. Chief Hakan Wakanen offered me sanctuary. I have made my choice." Clay Morrow nodded slowly. He had seen enough. He looked at Gus Palmer, and for the first time, he didn't just see a mean-spirited drunk. He saw a man entangled in something far darker. He saw a loose end. "Palmer," he said, his voice hardening, "I have a warrant for your arrest. For armed robbery and for the murder of Dr. Alistair Finch." Panic flared in Gus's eyes. His plan, Casca's plan, had disintegrated. He was trapped. With a desperate roar, he drew his pistol, but he was clumsy and slow. Hakan Wakanen moved with the speed of a striking snake, his hand chopping down on Gus's wrist. The gun clattered to the floor. In the same motion, Clay's pistol was drawn and leveled. "It's over, Gus," Clay said, his voice flat. As the deputy cuffed him, Gus's terrified gaze found Violet's. "This isn't the end of it," he spat. "Casca won't let this go. He'll find you. He'll find the valley." Hakan Wakanen's eyes narrowed at the name. He looked at Violet, a silent question passing between them. The name spoken with such terror confirmed the shadow she had felt, looming over them all. This was never just about Gus. The Lakota leader placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Tanyetu Win," he said, using a Lakota name that meant autumn woman for the season of change and harvest. "Are you ready to begin your new life?" Violet looked at the pathetic, defeated man who had been her husband. Then she looked at the grim-faced deputy, and finally at the dignified chief who had offered her a choice when she thought she had none left. "I am ready," she said, and stepped out of the trading post's dusty shadows and into the brilliant, unforgiving sunlight of her future. The journey to the sacred valley of the painted horses was like stepping through a veil into another world. For 3 days they traveled across landscapes that defied everything Violet had ever known of the harsh Wyoming territory. They rode through canyons carved by ancient rivers, their red rock walls inscribed with stories that predated memory. They crossed grasslands where the wild Mustang herds ran in breathtaking numbers, their coats 1,000 shades of dun roan and paint. Violet rode a gentle mare. Hakan had provided her initial awkwardness, giving way to a sense of liberation she hadn't felt since childhood. Hakan rode beside her on his magnificent paint stallion, a creature of such power and grace, it seemed a spirit-given form. He was a man of few words, but his actions spoke a language of profound respect. He never rode ahead, never treated her as a burden. He taught her to read the land, to find water where there seemed only rock, to listen to the whispers of the wind. On the evening of the 3rd day, they crested a high ridge, and Hakan brought his stallion to a halt. He gestured to the valley spread below them. What Violet saw stole the breath from her lungs. It was a perfect sanctuary, hidden from the world by a ring of impassable mountains. A crystal-clear river snaked through a meadow of impossibly green grass. Waterfalls cascaded down sheer rock faces, feeding the valley with life. And everywhere there were horses, hundreds of them moving with the wild, untamed grace of creatures who had never known a rope or a brand. Nestled against the far wall of the valley was the Lakota village, a collection of teepees and earth lodges that seemed to have grown from the landscape itself, our home. Hakan said, his voice filled with a quiet reverence. The valley where the horses paint the hills. My people have guarded this place for 7 generations. Their arrival was met with curiosity, not hostility. An elderly woman, her face a beautiful map of wrinkles and wisdom, approached them. Hakan introduced her as Grandmother Winona, the leader of the Women's Council. Her ancient eyes seemed to look straight into Violet's soul. She wishes to know why you are here, Hakan translated. If you come as a guest or as one seeking to join our people. Violet thought of the cold cabin of Gus's fists, of Kask's dead eyes. She looked at the vibrant living community before her. I seek to join your people, she said, her voice clear. If you will have me. Grandmother Winona studied her, then spoke in accented but precise English. You run from the white man's world because it brings you pain. But running towards something is different than running away. What do you bring to our people, Autumn Woman, besides your own sorrow? The question was a challenge, forcing Violet to look past her victimhood. I can work, she said. I can learn. I know how to tend the sick. I learned from a great doctor. I know horses. I am not afraid of hardship. I ask only for a chance to prove I am worthy of your trust. The elder nodded slowly. You will stay in my lodge for 1 moon cycle. You will learn our ways. At the end of that time, the council will decide. The following weeks were a crucible. Grandmother Winona was a demanding but patient teacher. Violet learned to tan hides, to identify medicinal plants, to speak the fluid, melodic Lakota language. The work was hard, but it was purposeful. For the first time, her hands were not just scrubbing another man's dirt, they were creating healing, contributing. She discovered a society where women's voices held weight, where elders were revered, and where the connection to the land and its creatures was a sacred trust. Her past, however, was a persistent ghost. Nightmares of the bank robbery of Dr. Finch's falling body haunted her sleep. The name Gus had screamed, Kask, was a cold stone in her heart. She confided her fears to Hakan one evening as they watched the horses graze in the twilight. She told him everything: the robbery, the stolen deeds, Kaska's obsession with the valley. Hakan listened with that profound stillness of his. This Kask, his name is known to us, he said, his voice grim. He was an army scout who guided soldiers against the Cheyenne. A man who moves like a shadow and leaves only sorrow in his wake. Your husband was a fool, but this man is a serpent. His interest in the deeds confirms what our scouts have suspected. The railroad is pushing west. They seek a pass through these mountains, a pass that runs directly through our valley. The revelation chilled Violet to the bone. This was not just a vendetta. It was a war for the heart of this land, and she was trapped in the middle of it. Her trial period drew to a close just as the first snows of winter began to dust the high peaks. The tribal council gathered, and Violet stood before them, her heart pounding. One by one, the people she had worked alongside spoke. They spoke of her hard work, her quick mind, and her gentle spirit. But it was her connection to the horses that had truly won them over. She seemed to possess an almost supernatural empathy for the animals, a gift for calming the fearful and healing the sick. When the vote was taken, it was unanimous. Tanyetu Win had earned her place among the horse people. That night, as the village celebrated, Hakan sought her out. The firelight danced in his dark eyes, revealing an emotion she had not dared to hope for. Your spirit is like that of our strongest mares, he said, his voice a low murmur. You have survived a hard winter and are ready for a new spring. Before she could reply, a warrior rode into the camp. His horse lathered in sweat, his face etched with urgency. He had been part of a scouting party sent to monitor the movements of outsiders near their territory. "Chief," he cried, "we have captured one of them, a scout. He was mapping the northern pass." Hakan and the other warriors moved quickly. They brought the captive into the council lodge. He was a wiry, hard-bitten man with shifty eyes. Under Hakan's questioning, his bravado crumbled. "It's Cask," and the scout stammered, his fear palpable. "He's coming. He bought Gus Palmer's freedom from some corrupt territorial marshal. He's got him and a whole gang of hired guns. But it ain't just about the railroad pass anymore." The scout looked at Violet, his eyes widening in recognition. "It's about him," he said, nodding toward Hakan. "And this valley. Cask. He grew up near here. His family had a homestead right on the edge of this valley years ago. They were killed in a raid. Cask was just a boy. He was out hunting and survived. He's always believed it was your tribe that did it." A heavy silence fell over the lodge. Hakan's face was like carved stone. "My father would not have raided a settler homestead. He defended them from renegades when he could. We have never shed the blood of women or children. He doesn't believe that the scout insisted. The deeds he stole from the bank in redemption, they were the original territorial grants for this land. He says they're his birthright. He says he's not just clearing a path for the railroad, he's taking back what was stolen from him. He's coming to wipe this valley off the map. He sees it as justice." The midpoint twist landed with the force of a physical blow. This was no longer just a corporate scheme to steal land. It was a deeply personal, decades-old vendetta fueled by a tragic, mistaken identity. Jeremiah Cask was not just a villain. He was a man hollowed out by grief and twisted by a thirst for a revenge he believed was righteous. And Gus, freed from jail, was now an even more dangerous tool, a desperate man with a personal score to settle. The stakes had been raised from the survival of a tribe to a final tragic confrontation between two histories, two families, and two completely different definitions of justice. Casque was not just coming for the land. He was coming for Hakan's soul. The news that Cask was coming armed with a gang and a vendetta settled over the village like a shroud of winter fog. The season turned with a sudden brutal ferocity. The sky grew heavy with leaden clouds, and a biting wind swept down from the high peaks, carrying the scent of a blizzard. The time for preparation was short. Hakan gathered his warriors, his face a grim mask. "He will come through the North Pass," he declared, his voice ringing with authority in the council lodge. "It is the only way for a large group with wagons. We will make our stand there." Violet, now a respected voice in the council, stepped forward. "Cask is a former army scout," she said, her knowledge of the white world suddenly a crucial asset. "He will expect a direct defense at the narrowest point. He will use tactics. We must use the land itself as our weapon." She worked alongside Hakan and the warriors, her mind sharp and clear. She suggested they build false trails leading to dead ends and rock slides. She helped the women prepare caches of food and medical supplies in hidden caves. Her hands, once soft and useless, were now calloused and capable. She was no longer a victim waiting to be rescued. She was a defender of her new home, her new people. As the storm gathered, the bond between her and Hakan deepened into a powerful, unspoken partnership. They moved and thought as one, their shared purpose forging a connection stronger than any words. In the quiet moments before the storm broke, he would look at her, his eyes full of a fierce protective love that was both a comfort and a sharp pain. For she knew what they were about to face. Scouts posted on the high ridges sent back terrifying reports. Casque's party was large, nearly 40 men, all heavily armed. They moved with a chilling efficiency, undeterred by the worsening weather. And leading them like a wraith from her past was Gus. He was Casca's bloodhound, his local knowledge of the outer territories proving invaluable. The first flakes of snow began to fall thick and wet, clinging to the pines and silencing the valley. The world grew quiet, a muffled, waiting stillness that was more terrifying than any war cry. The warriors took their positions in the high rocks overlooking the pass. Violet joined the women and children in the main cave, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. She was armed with a rifle and the knowledge of how to use it, but her greatest fear was not for herself, but for Håkon and the people who had given her a life worth fighting for. The blizzard hit with the force of a physical blow. The wind shrieked through the pass like a banshee, and the snow became a blinding, suffocating curtain of white. It was in the heart of this chaos that Cask attacked. The first shots echoed strangely in the muffled air. The battle for the North Pass began a desperate, swirling fight in near-zero visibility. The Lakota warriors used their knowledge of the terrain, appearing and disappearing like ghosts in the blizzard, their arrows finding their marks with deadly accuracy. But Cask's men were veterans, their repeating rifles laying down a withering fire. In the main cave, Violet could hear the sounds of the battle, a symphony of terror. She tended to the first wounded warrior brought back from the pass, her hands steady as she cleaned and bound his wound. The lessons Dr. Finch had taught her flooding back with a painful clarity. Then a runner stumbled into the cave, his face pale with shock. "They broke through," he gasped. A second group, they climbed the eastern ridge. "They're coming down behind us. Håkon and the others are trapped in the pass." It was a classic military pincer movement. Cask had used the blizzard as cover. Panic began to spread among the women and children. But Violet's voice cut through the fear. "We are not defeated," she cried, her voice ringing with a strength she didn't know she possessed. "Grandmother Winona, take the children and the elders deeper into the cave system. The rest of you with me. We will hold the valley entrance." She led a small, determined group of women to the mouth of the cave, which overlooked the path, leading from the pass into the valley proper. They took up positions behind a natural rockfall rifles ready. Through the swirling snow, she could see them coming, a line of dark figures moving through the white chaos. And then she saw him. Jeremiah Cask, his face an emotionless mask, moving with that same chilling calm she remembered from her cabin. Beside him, his face twisted with a mad, triumphant glee, was Gus. "There she is." Gus screamed over the wind, pointing directly at her. "The traitor, I told you we'd find her." The fight was desperate and close. Bullets ricocheted off the rocks, the air filled with the sharp scent of gunpowder and the screams of wounded men. Violet fired, reloaded, and fired again, her actions mechanical, her mind a cold, clear point of focus. Håkon and his warriors, realizing they had been outflanked, fought their way back from the pass, joining the defense at the cave mouth. The battle became a chaotic, swirling melee at the very gates of the sacred valley. Håkon found his way to her side, his presence a solid, reassuring anchor in the storm. "Tanya to win," he shouted over the din. "You are a true warrior of the horse people." Suddenly, Gus broke through the line, his eyes wild, fixed on Violet. He lunged for her, not with a gun, but with his bare hands, his face a mask of pure hatred. "You ruined me," he shrieked. "You are mine." Before he could reach her, Håkon intercepted him. The two men crashed to the ground, a tangle of desperate limbs. But as they fought, a larger confrontation was reaching its terrible climax. Cask, his path now clear, strode toward the entrance of the main cave, his pistol drawn. He was not interested in the fight. He was interested in annihilation. He raised his pistol to fire into the terrified group of elders and children huddled just inside. At that moment, one of Casca's own men, a young outlaw clutching a fatal wound to his gut, stumbled toward his leader. "Cask, stop the boy," gasped, his voice a wet rattle. "My pa. He was with the renegades that day, the ones who hit your homestead." Cask froze, his cold blue eyes turning on the dying man. "It wasn't them," the boy choked out, a bloody finger pointing toward Håkon, who was still struggling with Gus. "It was us. A mistake. We thought your pa was hiding gold. The Indians, their chief, Hakon's father, he tried to save them. He died trying to save your mother. The truth delivered in a dying man's last breath struck Jeremiah Casca with the force of a physical blow. The entire foundation of his life, the righteous vengeance that had fueled him for 20 years, crumbled into dust. His family hadn't been murdered by savages. They had been killed by the avarice of his own kind. And the man he had spent a lifetime hating was the son of the hero who had died trying to save them. His entire existence was a tragic, monstrous mistake. The pistol in his hand wavered. His face for the first time showed an emotion, a vast, empty chasm of despair. Seeing his leader falter, Gus, in a final act of spiteful cowardice, managed to grab his own pistol from its holster. He took aim not at Hakon, but at the broken figure of Jeremiah Casca. "You promised me a reward," he screamed. Violet saw the movement. Without thinking, she shoved Hakon aside, throwing herself in front of him. The world exploded in a flash of white-hot pain as Gus's bullet tore through her shoulder. She collapsed, the sound of the raging blizzard fading into a distant roar as darkness claimed the edges of her vision. The last thing she saw was Hakon, his face a mask of terrible fury, finally ending the struggle with Gus. And beyond them, Jeremiah Casca stood motionless in the swirling snow, a man utterly destroyed, not by a bullet, but by the truth. The blizzard raged for another day and another night, blanketing the valley in a deep, cleansing silence. When the storm finally broke, it revealed a world remade in crystalline white. The battle was over. Gus Palmer lay dead in the snow. Jeremiah Casca, a hollowed-out shell of a man, had surrendered without a word, his life's purpose extinguished. His remaining gang, their will broken, were rounded up by Hakon's victorious warriors. Violet survived. The bullet had passed clean through her shoulder, a painful but not fatal wound. She awoke in Grandmother Winona's lodge, the scent of sage and healing herbs filling the air. Hakon was there, his hand holding hers, his face etched with a fear she had never seen in him before. When her eyes opened, the relief that washed over him was so profound. It was like watching a mountain sigh. In the days that followed, the valley began to heal. The dead were mourned and buried with honor. The wounded were tended, and a new sense of purpose settled over the community. They had faced their greatest threat and had not broken. Deputy Clay Morrow and Captain Morrison arrived 2 days later, having tracked Casca through the storm. They took the broken man into custody, along with the satchel containing the stolen deeds. These documents, Captain Morrison said, his voice full of a newfound respect as he addressed Hakon. "And the tribal council prove your people's claim to this valley beyond any doubt. With Casca's testimony, I can ensure they are filed with the territorial government. This land will be protected." Casca's obsessive quest for a false revenge had, in a final bitter irony, secured the future of the very people he had meant to destroy. His life, built on a lie, had ended by serving the truth. As spring returned, melting the snow and bringing a tide of green to the valley, we found a new rhythm. Violet's wound healed, leaving a puckered scar on her shoulder, a permanent reminder of the price of her freedom. Her role in the battle had solidified her place not just as a member of the tribe, but as a leader. Her courage had inspired them, her strategic mind had helped save them. One warm afternoon, as the scent of pine and damp earth filled the air, Hakon led her to the sacred pool where the wild horses drank. In his hands, he held a necklace of silver and turquoise, a treasure passed down through generations of his family. "Tanyetu Win," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You came to us as a woman, running from a broken life. But you have shown us that the strongest spirits are not those that are never broken, but those that heal and become stronger in the broken places. My life is bound to this valley. I ask you to bind your life to mine." Tears streamed down Violet's face as he placed the marriage necklace around her neck. It was not a proposal born of ownership or duty, but a partnership of two souls who had been tested by fire and had emerged together. Their wedding was a celebration of survival and renewal, a union that symbolized not the merging of two worlds, but the creation of a new one, stronger and more resilient than before. Months later, when the summer sun had warmed the plains, Violet made one last journey. She rode back to the town of Redemption. It looked smaller, sadder than she remembered. The townspeople watched her with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. She was a ghost from another life returned. She did not go to see anyone. She went to the blacksmith shop, and with a quiet request used his tools to carefully hammer and mend the crushed silver locket that Deputy Morrow had saved for her. Its surface was scarred and imperfect, but the heart shape was restored. She walked to the small cemetery on the hill and stood before the simple wooden cross that marked the grave of Dr. Alistair Finch. She gently placed the repaired locket upon the mound of earth, a final tribute to the man who had shown her a kindness that had planted the first seed of her own strength. "Thank you," she whispered to the wind. She honored her past. She forgave herself. Then, without a backward glance, she turned and mounted her horse. She rode away from the dusty streets and the painful memories. Her face turned north toward the distant blue-hazed mountains. She rode toward the sacred valley, toward the thundering herds of painted horses, toward the man who was her husband and her partner. She rode toward her future, toward her home.